Rail fans point it out all the time. The Class 66 was built in the same North American plant that produces the big US freight locomotives. Put them next to each other, and the difference is immediate. The 66 is noticeably slimmer, lighter, and built for a completely different operating environment. Same manufacturer, same factory floor, completely different machine. And that contrast alone shows how far apart American and European railroading really are. So let's talk numbers first, because this is where it gets ridiculous. An American Tier 4 freight locomotive weighs about 432,000 pounds, which works out to roughly 200 tons of pure machine just sitting on the rails. It carries 5,000 gallons of diesel in its tank, is about 73 feet long, and produces 4,400 horsepower. Meanwhile, a European Vectron, which is considered a large modern freight engine there, weighs 90 tons and is 19 meters long, so it is not even half the weight of the American locomotives. But here's the thing, Europeans did not build smaller locomotives because they preferred dainty equipment or wanted to save money on steel. Both machines are exactly the size they need to be for completely different jobs. American freight trains average around 2 kilometers long, and many of them regularly stretch to 3, 4, sometimes even 5 kilometers of continuous rolling stock. You are looking at 200 cars carrying 15,000 tons of cargo, pulled by a single crew of 2 people. To move that kind of weight, you absolutely need massive locomotives, often 3 or 4 units spread throughout the train and coordinated from the lead unit. European freight trains, by contrast, are legally capped at around 700 to 750 meters maximum, depending on the country. That gets you maybe 50 cars and 4,000 tons if you are really pushing it. Building a 200-ton locomotive to haul, that would be like driving an 18-wheeler to pick up groceries. Now the question is, why these differences exist in the first place? And the answer goes back to how these railroads were built. When America laid its first transcontinental lines in the 1860s, the government handed out over 200 million acres of free land to railroad companies, which is larger than some European countries combined. They got up to 20 square mile sections for every mile of track, depending on the line and the act they built, arranged in a checkerboard pattern stretching dozens of miles on either side of the line. There was nothing in the way because there was literally nothing there, just empty prairie and desert and mountains waiting to be crossed. No medieval cities blocking routes, no tunnels dug for horse carts, no ancient bridges that could not handle the weight. Europe had the opposite problem entirely. Railroads had to thread through thousand-year-old cities, squeeze under bridges that were built before anyone imagined trains this size, and pass through tunnels that were already there and could not be widened without demolishing half a neighborhood. The infrastructure dictated what trains could look like, not the other way around. And those limitations became permanent because you cannot exactly rebuild every bridge and tunnel on a continent that has over 200,000 of them, many of which are approaching the end of their design life right now. This explains why American rails weigh 141 pounds per yard, while European rails come in at 113. Those old bridges simply cannot handle more weight. American axle loads run 32 tons standard with some lines pushing 36, but Europe maxes out at 22, or maybe 23 because anything heavier would crack infrastructure that was built before your great-grandfather was born. Double-stack containers changed everything for America in 1984, when someone figured out you could stack shipping containers too high and basically double your cargo with the same crew and fuel costs. Today, 70% of American intermodal freight runs double stack, which gives them a 20 to 40% cost advantage per container mile. Europe physically cannot do this because its loading gauge is only about 15 to 16 feet, compared to America's roughly 21 to 23 feet depending on the corridor. And even if the tunnels were tall enough, the overhead electrical wires for their trains hang right where that second container would need to go. Speaking of electricity, here is another massive difference. European railroads electrified early and heavily, which means cleaner operations and faster acceleration, but also those overhead wires that block double stacking. American railroads stayed with diesel because the distances are so vast that stringing wire across Wyoming or Montana made zero economic sense. Different geography led to different technology, and that led to limitations that compounded over decades. The coupling systems tell you everything about these philosophies. American Janney couplers are automatic. You just slam two cars together and they click into place. They can handle 32,000 tons of train weight. European buffer and chain systems require a person to walk between the cars and hook them up by hand. They are limited to 4,000 tons. The Janney was invented in 1873, and America eventually forced it through by federal law. But Europe already had millions of cars with buffers by then, and switching over was too expensive. So they are still using essentially the same system 150 years later. The ownership model matters too. American railroads have always been private companies focused on profit, which means freight gets priority, because moving 15,000 tons of coal pays better than dealing with passengers who complain about everything. European railroads were nationalized in most countries, often because governments feared foreign control of their infrastructure. Many countries nationalized to keep strategic control in national hands, especially smaller nations worried about foreign influence over their rail networks. Once governments ran the railroads, politicians wanted visible results that voters would appreciate, and passenger trains are a lot more visible than freight cars that move at night. The numbers prove this out completely. Over 80% of U.S. rail traffic is freight, and less than 20% is passenger service, while European railways flip that ratio almost exactly, with 80% passengers and 20% freight. European rail handles around 17% of inland freight ton kilometers, with trucks handling the rest, while American freight rail dominates its market. Same tracks, completely different purposes. And then there's safety, or the lack of it. American railroads had around 1,200 derailments in a recent year. Europe? The numbers are harder to compare because they count differently, but their significant derailment rate is a fraction of what America sees. Part of this comes from massive train lengths and the stress they put on equipment, and part of it comes from the cost-cutting philosophy that has taken over American railroads in the last decade. They call it precision-scheduled railroading, which sounds efficient, but really means running longer trains with fewer workers and less maintenance. The big freight carriers laid off 30% of their workforce between 2018 and 2022, and surprise, things started breaking more often. Both continents made fundamental choices over a century ago that are still shaping everything today. America chose freight and built the most efficient cargo network on Earth with the lowest ton-mile costs anywhere, but left passengers behind completely and left communities dealing with 3-mile-long trains blocking roads for hours. Europe chose people, fast trains, electrified tracks, legal quiet hours, and passengers love it, but their freight goes on trucks instead, millions of them clogging highways, burning diesel, and wearing out roads that taxpayers have to fix. Neither side got it completely right. They just got it differently wrong.